Welcome back to Product and Healthtech. My name is Nick Krabs. I'm a partner and the Chief Community Officer at Vinyl. Today, we sat down with Baird, the CEO of Switchboard Health, and he talked to us a whole bunch about how AI tooling and thoughts about how you organize product is revolutionizing their company's velocity to iterate on ideas. Let's jump into the conversation. Well, Derek, thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to have a conversation with you today. Real quick, I think for our audience, it's probably best to hear straight from you. Why don't you give a little intro on your background and tell us a little bit more about what Switchboard Health does?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Fun to do this with you. So, I'm Derek Baird, CEO and co-founder at Switchboard Health. We're a Boise-based digital health company. Our mission is really easy to say, but tough to pull off. We connect patients with great specialty care. Personally, I've been in digital health my whole career. I stumbled into it before I even graduated from college. And so that was a few years ago. And I've spent, a couple decades now trying to use technology to improve how care is delivered and how providers operate and deliver care and get paid for care and, a whole bunch of other use cases and needs along the way. There's plenty in healthcare to work on and plenty of areas that need improvement.
Yeah. And you got recruited kind of through the venture process to run this company, correct?
Yeah.
Which is a little different. Can you just talk a little bit about how you got involved and how you've kind of, again, that's a little different of a process for a lot of early stage companies.
Yeah. So the idea for Switchboard grew up within a venture capital firm, Route 66 Ventures, which is based in Northern Virginia. They'd been working on this idea and were looking for a company to invest in that was trying to address some of these challenges. And so they're very much an invest first fund. And then if they see white space and aren't finding a company that they want to back, then and only then do they say, hey, should we form a new co ourselves? And so they'd been grinding on this idea and doing a lot of market validation, market research, really pressure testing the concept for, depending on how you count, like 6 to 9 months before they said, wow, we're really onto something here. Let's find a CEO, let's put some money behind this idea, and let's launch what we now call Switchboard. And so summer of 2022, I got to know them as they were, had just made the decision to launch the business and provide the initial funding, and fell in love with the idea and loved the guys at Route 66 and said, yeah, look, being a digital health CEO usually involves a multi-year journey, and this felt like a great mission and a great problem that finally needs to be solved.
So like elevator pitch level quality here.
Yeah.
What specifically is the idea that you guys were grinding on and now you're kind of testing and delivering on?
Yeah, I remember this from a couple decades ago, like the way that patients are navigated to specialists is, and unfortunately most of us have experienced this ourselves or as dads or as, caregivers for parents. Like often you're just told by a primary care doc, like, hey, here's where you go. And, that may or may not be the right destination or the right specialist for you. Or often you're said, hey, just go find an in-network rheumatologist, good luck and Godspeed. And so the problem is an old one, which is about 40% of patients then just give up along the way because they don't know what a rheumatologist is, or they don't know what in-network means, or they lose the little slip of paper from their PCP with a specialist name on it, or they have trouble finding an appointment, or that specialist retired or doesn't take their insurance after all. And so you just have a lot of dropped balls along the way,
Sure.
Which means patients not getting the care that they need, which usually leads to bad, expensive things occurring.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why this is starting to change is either insurance companies, health plans, or primary care providers are now financially responsible for specialty care costs.
Right.
So now you
you
got
can
a
control
lot of
it.
people.
Yeah.
You got a lot of people who are much more motivated to ensure that patient finds the right specialist and can get in, can be seen, and can have their care needs addressed. And so the good news for us as patients or kids or the one footing the bill is there's a lot more alignment around doing this in better ways. And so that's the rather long problem statement. The solution that we bring, as the name implies, is if you tell the switchboard who's the patient, where do they live, what insurance do they have, and what type of care do they need, that then comes into our system, and we look at all the specialists, like here in the Treasure Valley, we look at what insurance they take, we look at who has availability, we look at their cost quality data, and we say, hey, for Derek with his startup CEO headaches, this is the right neurologist for him. Let's make sure he gets an appointment and gets seen, which is, dramatically better than what has been the status quo for a long time.
Oh, for sure. Well, and also I think you're really tapping into this cost control nature. So specialists generally, they get used a lot more in kind of the most expensive situation in our healthcare system, which is chronic health issues, right? You have a lot more specialists involved in those. I don't know if the statistic is exactly true, but it's over 50% of the healthcare costs tend to come from kind of chronic healthcare issues, which again involve a lot of specialists. So you're definitely tapping into, one of the big, just from a cost control standpoint, pain points that bears across our health systems. One of the things we like to do on this podcast generally is kind of give our guests an opportunity to like ring the bell on something that's happened to them recently that's been a big victory. And you have something right now, which is that you recently acquired Conduce Health and get to bring a Google alum alongside you guys and some data science on the team. Can you talk a little bit about that acquisition? And I don't have a bell to physically ring, but we'll get to cheer anyways.
We can add one on.
Yeah, there you go.
We'll do it in the post-editing process. So so really this was, the end of September now. We announced the acquisition of Conduce, which is working on a similar problem set. We've left their website up there. You can go check them out at conducehealth.com, but was also working to improve how specialty care is delivered and how it's connected and how patients don't get lost along the way. They'd really been focused on developing AI and predictive models so that it's not just about who's a good neurologist overall, it's which neurologists have shown that they're really good at taking care of patients like hypothetical Derek in this situation. So they some really, really fantastic technology that, over the last few years, Switchboard's been very focused on building a front end and getting integrated with other systems like EMRs.
Right.
And so the marriage just, the more we looked at it, the more it made a lot of sense to take the AI capabilities that they developed and some of those team members and put it into our platform, which is, brings this magic to life in the middle of the workflow or the point of care. So for us, we get great technology, some great new team members that would have been a long recruiting process to find data engineers and data scientists of this caliber. And so it's been great.
Certainly at the stage that you guys are, if you compare the IP needs with a little bit of acqui-hire for sure, you can certainly make a puzzle piece kind of slide in really nicely. Well, like I said, I don't have a physical bell to ring, but congratulations. I know that was a big step for you guys. I know that was something that you've been working on for quite a while. So kind of pivoting this conversation, and really one of the big reasons I wanted to talk to you and kind of get this recorded and get it out on our podcast is that, you and I had lunch a few months ago now, probably longer, than my brain is just slipping on time. And one of the things that you had kind of piqued my interest was you were exploring this idea of, almost eliminating the product management role in its traditional sense within your organization, and really using a lot more AI tooling and, kind of spanning those things across multiple team members. And so just like hearing you kind of talk through this, which at the time was really maybe a more radical thing to be testing. I think there's a lot of people looking at this now, but, several months ago, I think you were kind of a little bit more at the forefront of exploring what that might look like in an organization that's trying to move fast, that's trying to like cross bridges as quickly as humanly possible to seek opportunity. I really want to like check in on that experience.
Yeah.
Like, I really want to hear a little bit more about, so maybe we can go back to, even before you and I had a lunch meeting, several months ago, maybe set the stage for how you started on that journey and then tell us, where it's gotten you.
Yeah. Well, before people turn this off because they think I'm a CPO hater or someone who doesn't believe in product management as a function. I mean, I grew up in product.
Right.
So, 23 years ago, most tech firms actually didn't have product as its own team. So I grew up in marketing, and at the time, like what we now think of product today was sort of half of it was done by engineers, the technical product management, and then marketing, and I've just by default did the other half, which was all the product marketing management. Turns out I really liked the product side of things. So after starting in marketing, I then went into product for a good number of years. So I'm not a product hater. I'm one of the biggest product fanboys you'll find as a discipline and as a I think a really, really interesting mix of art and science.
Right.
And I used to use this line, which was like, I loved product. I think it was one of the most stimulating roles I've ever done. I also think at the time it was one of the most thankless roles I'd ever done. But just know I'm a big believer in that as a key function. And really, I think for many young tech companies, like the key to winning, I think largely hinges on whether it's a person, a team, or a function that's diffused within the company. Like, I really think that's the largest fulcrum for success. I just think, to get to our conversation a few months ago, I think the way that you organize around that just needs to be very different in 2025 than it was, even 2 years ago.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm seeing a lot of different organizations trying to test right now. I'm seeing a lot of kind of like, diffused responsibility across several other disciplines as a way to cover the same discipline, but not necessarily a single person or role that owns it all the way through, but you still have to cover the functions. And again, using a lot more AI tooling as part of the speed to test those ideas and get feedback quickly. So anyways, so pivoting back.
And I think that, and I think for a seed stage company, like the CEO should be playing a very active role. Maybe my team might quibble with how active that should be. But look, I think even for later stage companies, like if you're not acting as an individual contributor in the mix of product strategy and prototype development and UAT, like I think you as a CEO are failing your business. And we've sort of moved away from having product as a team or an individual, and have said, look, the way that we prioritize ideas is going to be diffused. Ultimately, I have decision rights on that.
Right.
Often I'll change my mind because the team convinces me that my original idea is the wrong one. And so it's not like ruling by fiat, but ultimately, like I make the calls on what we do and what it looks like. I think that has helped us go faster. I don't always make the right calls, but no one does. And it has just brought real speed and clarity and alignment to the process.
Well, it seems like when I had talked to you before, and you might have been getting there, so I didn't mean to cut you off, but so many of the decisions you were talking to me about at the time were really about opportunities that you had in the marketplace that were coming directly from either prospective or current clients, right? Which is, when you think about the discipline of product management or product generally, so much of it is about how do you make good choices on what to build And how do you get the feedback from either the market generally or directly from your existing clients on how to get there? And then there's just a velocity question.
Yeah.
Like how what's your speed to design, build, and then go put that in front of the people who've now given you right the feedback. And I think what really piqued my interest is when I was talking to you is your belief in the CEO's role in understanding at a really deep level what the market or your clients are asking for. And that's, I think, a lot of times something that a CEO is involved in, but they're hearing it almost second hand, right? And that did not seem to be your philosophy, which I thought was really interesting, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think this day and age, like the CEO has got to be like at the coalface and just, I mean, out there in the market hearing firsthand. And so I think that's going to continue for as long as I'm at the helm. I think that's regardless of stage or maturity or how many current clients you have. I think the way to compete and win where the tech is increasingly commoditized and the way to earn, an unfair advantage versus competitors big and small is just being out in the market and hearing those insights firsthand.
Yeah.
And then I think from there, like, okay, a lot of CEOs or product leaders have been doing that for years, but in the past, it's like, okay, well then let's write up a PRD and let's have several weeks of meetings and then let's build some wireframes.
So this is that velocity question now, right?
And maybe we'll feel like overachievers and we'll have some clickable prototypes. And then 8 weeks later, maybe if you're lucky, you go back to the client and are like, is this what you mean? And they say, no, you got it wrong. And then a 6-week redo ensues. And now it's like, look, I fly to Florida tomorrow. I'm going to learn a bunch in the 2 days that I'm running around down there. I'm going to come back. We're going to have one meeting and decide on at least one thing that we're going to build a prototype on that'll probably be measured in days, not weeks. And then we're back at the client 6 days later with a real clickable application saying, did we hit the bullseye or not? And they'll probably say, no, but you're on the dartboard. Right? And then the next cycle's 3 days. And I think the pace that you can reach and maintain with those types of loops for me is really exciting and invigorates the whole team.
Right. Well, and just from maybe just a purely blocking and tackling standpoint, I mean, it sounds like you've gone and done the learning with this client, which is great, and then you come back, you have one meeting with your team. Can you talk a little bit about then how the work actually gets dispersed, right? And what tooling you're currently using? I mean, this is changing so fast right now.
Yeah.
You reserve the right to be wrong in a week, right?
Yeah.
But right now, today.
Yeah, right now, if it's something with a front end, we're partying in Lovable, right? And we've used V0 for some of this, but right now, for rapid iteration and stuff that even I can do, and I'm a non-technical founder, and knock on wood, I have yet to break one of our Lovable apps with a terrible series of prompts.
Yeah.
And I say apps, we really think of these as prototypes. And that just, gives you an idea of the contours of the idea that you're exploring in a way that I don't think you can get from an old-fashioned, written document or even a bunch of, flat static wireframes in Figma. And so, I know Figma has tooling that allows this, but a lot of our action has moved out of, Google Docs and Figma and into, let's just jump ahead. And the quickest way to pressure test some of these ideas, both from a feasibility, can we build this standpoint, and a will the client be delighted by it standpoint is using Lovable. And then for more back end and more of our automation use cases, we've got some safe spaces to spin up some models or some orchestration routines that, again, we can show to the clients. And if they don't love it, that's okay. We didn't spend 8 weeks on it.
Right. right? And that's, and if you just think about startup land and failing fast and iterating quickly, and again, a lot of this is just about what is your velocity to get through ideas and test those with the marketplace in whatever form that takes. I mean, you're going directly to individual clients, but there's a lot of different marketplaces that you test a different way on how you get that feedback. And so, again, it's very interesting how quickly that velocity. Now, do you typically have your engineering team managing kind of the clickable prototypes, or are you still holding on to that yourself as a CEO? How does that work get dispersed?
It's both.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully the engineers have been, leaning into this and want to be kind of on the leading edge of this prototype development and, working on things that may then graduate to mainline product. So we even call it Switchboard Labs, just to make it really clear to us
and everybody
and
else.
The client and the prospect, like,
Right.
hey, this isn't production grade. We're a high trust certified company. And so, in order for something to make it into our core infrastructure and mainline product, like, don't confuse that with what we're playing around with in the lab. But you've got a great mix. You've got, I'm in the mix, but I would say I'm more of a supporting actor than a lead actor.
Mm-hmm.
We have people who are like me, recovering product managers that have other roles within the company, but then are able to participate in that process and bring, some really great insight and a really great way of thinking. And then we have engineers in the mix, kind of keeping us honest and doing the lion's share of the prototype development, just to make sure we're not like charging down a cul-de-sac, so that if and when it becomes time to promote something to, mainline product, we haven't gotten all excited about something that's not going to be feasible when we decide to promote it. So I think it's look, we're a 12-person company.
Right.
I mean, a lot of this is like we're all together on the line riffing on this, which I think is pretty invigorating for everybody, no matter what your job title is at Switchboard.
Well, I think every company, regardless of size, we've seen this a lot at Vinyl when we work with like Fortune 500s, right? This idea of how do you make decisions quickly? How do you iterate quickly? How do you get the buy-in quickly? What stakeholders have to be there? For a long time, we used to use the Google Ventures sprint process. And, the truth is that process, it's not dead, right? Like, I would say that there's still a lot of value in why you go through those steps, but certainly there's a lot of ways to shortcut the output of a process like that. I don't know that I would recommend that book now, right? You know, and for a long time I used to walk around and be like, have you read this? This is what we do, right?
Maybe specific pages, but not the whole thing.
They have a lot of stuff in that book about how you get the right stakeholders and to get the buy-in you need in order to make decisions quickly, to have something to test. And I think the bigger an organization is, some of that stuff is still very relevant, right? But then the actual learnings that you're taking from whatever the prototype is that you're taking out into the world, like, that is all super shortcutted, and you can do it many, many, many cycles in what used to be maybe 1 or 2 tests that you'd get. You said 8 weeks. I mean, it all is variable depending on the organization and what you're doing. But now you could run a similar process and maybe have 20 tests that you could do and take up the same amount of time, right? And that's a pretty unique advantage for companies and individuals who are taking advantage of this aggressive, a lot more aggressive way of testing this stuff.
Yeah, and it's not like me or a product person like off in the woods, toiling away for a few weeks, and like everybody's in the mix the whole time, which again, I think helps us go faster, but also leads to a better product.
Right.
And you can shortcut a lot of that. Like, okay, I'm re-emerging from the woods, and now as a product person, I need to spend a few weeks like getting everybody bought in and catching them up on what I've been doing.
Right.
All that just thankfully gets a lot simpler and easier, and I think more fun for everyone.
Well, in the technology space, there's plenty of roads that get built to nowhere in this stuff. But at least in this world, like you didn't have to spend a lot of resources to like put those 2 miles of pavement down and be like,
Yeah.
not that one.
Yep.
So, I think you touched on something that's maybe a little bit interesting to dive a little bit deeper, and that's trust in this new way of doing it, right? And so you've literally like put some marketing language around this to kind of sequester or head off maybe a trust issue that you could run into with a prospective client in using new methodologies or new tools. And again, for you, this is all about trying to gain market signal on new pieces of your product. So that's an interesting dynamic to navigate. Can you talk a little bit more about either the advantages or disadvantages on why you put together a Switchboard Labs to communicate this idea while you're going out and bringing a new methodology into your organization?
Yeah, I think from an external standpoint, like it just makes it really clear to clients. I mean, look, there's too many companies in tech that present features as if they're fully baked and ready to go. And look, they're selling.
Vaporware is a thing.
It's still a thing, right? Selling futures is still a thing, and so I think this just makes it really clear. Like, no, this isn't ready. We're not going to ship this to you tomorrow. Okay, and so I find that that's made it very black and white versus what has often been shades of gray. And I think the clients really appreciate that because I think many of them have been sold gray things that truly weren't ready for prime time. And so I think it's refreshing for them to know, like, this is, to use the old fashioned term, like this is still in beta or in alpha or just in prototype, like internal prototype.
Well, and sometimes this also helps in the sales cycle too, because when clients, either prospective or current in almost any organization, feel like they're part of the feedback loop on what's being built, when it actually comes time for them to pony up and sign up for it, if they've been part of this iterative cycle, they're usually much quicker to adopt and much quicker, assuming that you're selling features in that way, but they're much quicker to be like, oh yeah, well I've seen iterations of this for a long time. Yeah.
And even if they don't adopt or buy that new feature, they see like, wow, Switchboard is like, they are moving fast. They're always working on new stuff. Like I may not want the thing coming out of the lab, but it sort of shines a light on, in a good way, on, the fact that like we're really, really busy testing new ideas and working on new stuff. And then I think internally, that distinction between the lab and something that's GA, I think also makes it really clear, like what processes and methodologies are we using, right? Like obviously the QA and the security and the way that we treat
and compliance,
production level, exactly, is and should be very different than when we're working away in the lab. And so I just think sometimes, I've seen this where products sort of end up in between and people are like, well, are we like multi-factor authing that thing or not? Like it's sort of like in the no man's land. And so I think it's been helpful for us internally.
To separate the two out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in that same vein, if someone's watching or listening to this podcast right now and they're, maybe they're currently a working product, or they're trying to think about how to, add some, again, velocity in this cycle, or they're trying to bring new methodology into their organization, or they just want to learn more, what's like maybe one piece of evergreen advice you would give to that person trying to explore, not maybe just how to use some of the tooling themselves, but to give some organizational buy-in to do this in a different way?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure it'll be evergreen.
We reserve the right to change our minds.
Exactly. We've already talked about books, part of them not aging well. But I think right now, if I were still working in product, I think what I would be thinking about is expanding the scope of what I can and should be doing. And I think there's two ways that I think about that. One is, if you're not playing around with prototypes and building using tools like V0 or Lovable, I think that's a big miss, because I think you need to get in there to really understand the contours of these applications. Just the same with the LLMs and the frontier models. Like, you can't just read about them or listen to podcasts about them. The best engineers and product people I know on the weekends are like building stuff for themselves in these applications, and using the LLMs for personal reasons, because then I think you can figure out where they're really succeeding and where they're not quite there yet. And so I think if you're a product person and you're not building, I think that's a real mess. And I think separate from but related is from a design and UX standpoint, I think about it similarly. So I think successful product people will be able to thrive as the kind of lines between engineering, UX, and traditional product management, like those lines are already blurring. I think they're going to collapse altogether.
Oh, I think you're completely right.
And so I just think you've got to be a lot more versatile, and I just think the learning really compounds on this. And so you've just got to get into learning and playing around mode, to keep pace with, what's state of the art in, wherever the heck we're going to draw the box around product management going forward.
Right. Well, hey, I think that's a pretty great place to leave this conversation. I know you and I will probably meet up and continue to have it after this podcast's over. I just want to say thank you for coming down and having a quick conversation. This was, again, invigorating and interesting to hear you talk about your company and the things that you guys are up to right now. I appreciate you a ton, and we'll see you around soon.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.